Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and Mirat Hashem, we will be completing Daf Pei Gimel Amid Beis, and as well as doing a bit, or hopefully more than a bit, of Pei Dalet Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Berachos HaShachar. We pick up today on Pei Gimel Amid Beis, Siman Nun Gimel Sif Chaf, the second line down in the Shulchan Aruch on Pei Gimel Amid Beis, says the Mechaber. Im echad writes a loymar tefillah b'shvil aviv. If somebody wants to daven for the Amid, he wants to be the chazzan. Why? B'shvil aviv, because he's in avelus for his father. So he's an avel, he's a chiyuv, he wants to daven for the Amid. Ve'echad writes a loymar b'shvil acher. And there's somebody else in the tzibbur who's not a chiyuv like this person. This person is a chiyuv to daven for the Amid because he's an avelus for his father. This other individual also wants to daven for the Amid because he has another relative maybe that died that day, or that he is keeping some level of avelus for, but not like avelus for a father. The Mechaber says, Mi sheyirtza hakahol sheyomer hatfila, the one that the kahal, the one that the kehillah wants that should daven for the Amid, who yomer, he's the one who davens for the Amid. So if the kehillah sides with the one who's not in avelus for his father, clearly a lesser chiyuv for the Amid, but if that's the person that the kehillah wants to daven for the Amid, says the Mechaber, that's the one who davens for the Amid. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Nun Tes. Bishvil Aviv. Somebody wants to daven for his father. What does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirush, Shemes Aviv, his father has passed away, V'roitza lehispalel, and he wants to daven for the Amid, Kederech ha'avelim, which is the way of avelim, right? He's a chiyuv. He's in avelus for his father, Tak Shana. He wants to daven for the Amid. And the Mishnah Berurah says, and this is something very important to know, Ki tefillah hi yoser mitzvah me'amiras HaKadosh. Everybody makes a very big deal, and rightfully so, about reciting Kaddish, saying Kaddish for the loss of a parent. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the davening for the Amud is more important than the Amiras HaKadosh. Sheyirtza Hakal is Katan Samach, the one that the Kehillah prefers, that's the one who has Kedima. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Tam, the reason is, the Dafka Kaddish Yachal Loymar Bishvil Aviv, Ve'ein Rishus B'yad HaKal L'tchoisai. He brings down over here from the Magen Avram that it is only by Kaddish that we say that an Oval has the right to say Kaddish, and the Kehillah cannot stop him from saying Kaddish. The Kehillah cannot tell an Oval that he can't say Kaddish. But to daven for the Amud, that the Kehillah could stop. The Kehillah could say, even though you're a Chiv, we want somebody else to daven for the Amud. You cannot be a shliach tzibbur. You can't be the shliach of the tzibbur against the will of the tzibbur. So it's very nice that you're calling yourself a chiv. It's very nice that you're saying that you have to daven for the Amid for your father. But you can't foist yourself on the tzibbur. If the tzibbur says no, then the answer is no. He says over here in the Mishnah Berurah, he does say that over here, Lamaisa, we follow the same rules as what we've been learning in the last several days, that we always follow by a shliach tzibur. She'ein yachid moicha kedei shalayir b'hamachlokes. A yachid should not get up and say, "Oh, I don't want this oval to daven for the Amid." What do you make machlokes for? And if he does, if a yachid does get up, we don't listen to him nowadays. Ela holchen acharoiv, ayhan nivrarim lazeh. We either go by the majority of the kehillah or by the gaboim, the ones who are in charge. Now it's very interesting. We had over here in the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Nun Tes, where he said that davening for the Amid is more important than Kaddish. You have to realize that the Kaddish Yosem that we have was Niskan. It was created really for young children that can't daven for the Amid. They don't know how. Or people, Amaratzim, who don't know how to daven for the Amid. So the Chazal, they will masaket a Kaddish, that there's a Kaddish that they could say, l'chvoid, the parent that they lost. But if somebody could daven for the Amud, that's even better than saying Kaddish. Now we go weiter over here in the Mishnah Berurah. There are places where they have a rule in the shuls that during the week they don't allow chiyuvim to daven for the Amid. That they don't do that. They have a shliach tzibbur kavua, they have a set chazzan, and that's who davens for the Amid, and they don't give the Amid to avelim. And ein litchais takana. Mishnah Berurah says places that have that takana, you can't push away that takana. And he explains what this takana is based on. The reason they made this takana is because there were places where avelim, who are complete amaratzim, who didn't understand the davening, maybe they can't even read properly, would end up davening for the Amud, because Ilusa would be an embarrassment for the tefillah. It's not covered on tzibbur. Lakach tiknu afilu ala yoidim shelo yispalalu mishum delay seili in suye, and because of that, they were masakin that even those who do know how to daven for the Amud should not daven for the Amud. Rather, there should be a shliach tzibbur kavua who always davens for the Amud. But in a place that doesn't have such a minig, it's a mitzvah for the kehillah to allow the avel to daven for the amid, shu nachas ruach lameis, because this is a nachas ruach. It's a benefit to the niftar, umatziloi b'dinoi shel gehinam, and it does save him somewhat from dinoi shel gehinam. Umiu v'adai kishein yochel achtor cha'is yais v'chadoima. But if an avel can't be mechatech the oisiyos, literally what that means is he can't cut the letters. It means he can't enunciate the words properly. Then he has no business davening for the Amid. Ein loyal hispal if they Amid. Kasav Magen Avram writes, Im yesh avel u'mayel. If you have two people who are, so to speak, chiyuvim for the Amid. You have an avel who lost a parent who wants to daven for the Amid, but there's also a bris milah in the shul, and there's a mayel. The mayel is also considered a chiyuv to daven for the Amid. Nidche ha'avel min ha'tfila machmas ha'mayel. The Magen Avram says the mayel comes first. V'yom shemeis by other v'imay shekarin yartzeit. On the day of the yartzeit, doichel ha'mayel v'la avel. A boy b'yom yartzeit pushes away both a mayel and an avel. V'chol zeh she'ein hakpal makpidin al zeh. And again, this is only when the killer doesn't have hakpados. Aval yesh rishus b'yad hakal livchar le'em misha yirtzu. Ultimately, the kehillah has the right to choose the chazzan that they want. Who Yomar, the one that the kehillah prefers, is the one who has kedima to daven for the Amid. Says the Mishnah Berurah betfilas, Ma'ariv shu einoi keneged timidim, rak keneged evarim upedarim. If you remember, we started off this discussion previously by saying, why is it that the tzibbur has such a level of control over who davens for the Amid? Because tefillah stands in the place of the carbon tamid. And that means that the shliach tzibbur is representing, he's sending the tefillah up to Shamayim on behalf of the tzibbur, and every member of the tzibbur has a chelik in the davening, the same way every member of Klal Yisrael has a chelik in the carbon tamid. And you can't bring my davening to Shamayim if I don't approve of you being the shliach. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, wait a second. We know that davening shacharis, the shacharis shmona esrei, is keneged the carbon tamid of the shachar. The mincha shmona esrei is keneged the tamid shel bein arbayim. But the Ma'ariv shmona esrei is not keneged a carbon. It's not. There's no tamid that was brought at night. Indeed, there's no karbanos brought at night. Tfilas Ma'ariv is keneged the evarim upedarim. Those are the limbs and the fats, the emurin, the parts of the karbanos that are burnt on the mizbeach. They were burnt at night. All night long there was a fire going on the mizbeach, and the evarim upedarim, the limbs and the fats of the karbanos, the parts of the karbanos that are burnt on the mizbeach, were burning all night. And we daven Ma'ariv keneged the evarim upedarim. But that's not keneged the carbon tamid. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, by Ma'ariv, Efsher de in tzarich dais pailim. Veina kol yichar la'akev la'avel hispal ma'ariv. He brings down the idea, could be that ma'ariv is different than shachris and mincha. Shachris and mincha, you're right. That's keneged the carbon tamid. And you have a share in the carbon tamid, you have a chelik in the davening, you could protest if you don't like the shliach tzibbur. But ma'ariv is keneged the evarim and the pedarim. That's not the din of a carbon. So who says that you could protest against the shliach tzibbur from ma'ariv? He says maybe you can't. The mitzvah sheyispal mishemeis lo'yava v'imoi. So if there's an oval, maybe you can't protest by ma'ariv against an oval davening. Yet, says the Mishnah Berurah, mikamokim, nevertheless, vadai ein lehiskaitei tepishfol shum mitzvah im hatzibur. The bottom line is, you should never get into a machlokes, you should never get into a fight over something that you perceive or something that actually is a mitzvah. In other words, don't be l'shem shamayim and say that I'm going to fight to daven for the amud when the tzibbur doesn't want me to fight for the amud. Even though it's a mitzvah to daven on the yard site. Doesn't matter, don't make a machlokes. And we'll see that when we get to it. Now we turn back to the Shulchan Aruch, 2 lines on the bottom, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, Sif Chaf Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Ein lamano shliach tzibur al pisar oived gilulim. You should not appoint a shliach tzibur based on the pressure from an Eino Yehudi governmental official. Afal pisha roivat tzibur chafetzim boy. And this is true even if most of the Kehillah wants this shliach tzibur, but now you're ready to appoint him, not because of the tzibur, but because an Eino Yehudi governmental official came in with his pull, and he said, I want that person to be your shliach tzibur. No, don't appoint based on pressure from a non-Jewish governmental individual. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Kan samach beis afa pisha reva tzibur chafesim v'hasar bikesh me'amiut hamama'anim sheyeskimu alav." What's happening over here is Roiv of the tzibur wants this shliach tzibur, but we've seen that sometimes even a yachid, even an individual, could protest against the appointment of a specific shliach tzibur. But now this government official is coming in and he's asking the minority, listen to me and let them appoint that person. Says the Mechaber, you don't do that. Explains the Mishnah Berurah why. Ki chalila lekabel avodas bayrenu al yedei ha'ovdei kechavim u'mazalois. We're not going to determine who our shliach tzibur for our avodas habayre should be based on some oved avodah zara who's pressuring us who to take as a shliach tzibur. Bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, Sif Chav Beis. Very interesting halacha that might take some people by surprise. Shliach tzibur b'schar odif tfei mi b'nedava. Says the Mechaber, it is preferential to use a chazzan, a shliach tzibur, that gets paid than to use a volunteer. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah Samach Gimel. B'schar odif, it's better to make use of a paid shliach tzibur. Shebazeh ein akar she'enoi hogun rashoy livshoy raglo lehispal. If you have a paid shliach tzibur, then nobody else has any business coming to the amud. Now you have effectively figured out a way to prevent somebody who's not worthy of being a shliach tzibur from becoming a shliach tzibur. Somebody comes and says, I want to daven for the amud. You don't have to get into a din udvarim with him and say, we don't want you, your pronunciation is not so good, you're not fluent in the davening. No, we have a paid shliach tzibur. That's it. Once we have a paid shliach tzibur, nobody else davens for the amud. V'im haya b'nedava, but if the amud was up for volunteers, harishus desuna lakoil, then anybody could step up to the plate and say, I want to daven for the amud, and then you get fights. V'chefroitz hadavar yalamisha enoi hogun, and once it becomes hefker that anybody can daven for the amud, you're going to have people who are not worthy davening for the amud. So that's one reason, says the Mishnah Berurah, why it's better to have a paid shliach tzibur than to have a volunteer. Furthermore, if the shliach tzibur is paid, then he's going to do a better job because he doesn't want to lose his job. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, so, okay, we've established that it's better to have a paid shliach tzibur. But what if we have a situation where we have volunteers who are willing to daven for the amud for nothing? We have a candidate who we could pay to be a shliach tzibur, but the kehillah is not a rich kehillah, and some of the aniyim in the kehillah come forward, and they say, look, it's very nice that in Siman Nun Gimel, Sif Chav Beis, the Mechaber says it's better to have a paid shliach tzibbur than a volunteer shliach tzibbur, but don't tax me because it's better to have a paid shliach tzibbur. I can't afford it. So if there's somebody who's willing to do it for nothing, appoint the one who's willing to do it for nothing. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. V'av sheyesh bechinam, even though there are those candidates who are willing to be shluchei tzibur for nothing, tzrichin ha'aniyim gam ken litein tzchiras ha'shliach tzibur. The aniyim of the town cannot use that as a way of escaping the tax. Even the aniyim have to pay for a paid shliach tzibur, even though there are those who are willing to daven for the Yomid for nothing. Shliach tzibur b'schar odif. Because as we've seen, it's preferential to have a paid shliach tzibur than to have a volunteer. Says the Ramah, bottom line, Pei Gimel Amud Beis, Hagah. Ve'ein la'adam lehispalel b'loy rotzain hakol. A person should not go up to the Yomid and daven for the Yomid without the agreement of the kehillah. V'chol mi shemispal b'chazaka v'derech almus. Anybody who goes and takes the Amid through strength or by force, ein oinin amein achar berchoisav. Says the Ramah, you are not allowed to answer amein to the brachas of such a chazzan. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Pei Gimel Amud Beis, ois katan samach daled. You shouldn't go up to daven lehispalel oy liskaya, or to blow shofar. So you don't go to the Amid without the agreement of the kehillah. You don't blow shofar without the agreement of the kehillah. Samachei b'loy rotzain, without their agreement. Ve'ed la'adam lehiskaitet ba'avor shom mitzvah. And again, the Mishnah Berurah reiterates what he said earlier, and he brings us down from the Dakei Moshe, from the Ramah on the Torah, and from the Magen Avram, that you should never make a machlokes over something which is a dvar mitzvah. You want to daven for the Amid. You want to be the Baal Tekeah. But there are people who don't want you. Don't dig in your heels and say, no, it's my schus, I want to do it, I have a right. Don't make machlokes over something that's a mitzvah. Kigoin Galiloi Sefer Torah, like Hagba, Galila, the Kiyotzabai. Don't make fights over these things. Sharei Shaninu, because we learned that the Gemara in Kedushin Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, when it came to the Lechem Haponim, we know that the Lechem Haponim was divided up each Shabbos. They unloaded the Lechem Haponim off of the Shulchan, and those challahs, the Lechem Haponim, they were divided up amongst the Mishmar, amongst the group of Kahanim that was leaving that Shabbos, and the new group that was coming in. They divided up the Lechem Haponim. And it says over there in Kedushin, Hatznuim, the humble people, the humble Kayanim, Moishchim es Yedehem milechem Haponim. They stood back, and they didn't go to chap from the lechem haponim. They stood off to the side, and if they'll get, they'll get. V'har gargaronim, but the gluttonous individuals, choytvim, they would go to grab for the lechem haponim. V'achilas lechem haponim were mitzvah. Now, eating the lechem haponim is a mitzvah. So you might think, yeah, I want to go run and grab lechem haponim because I want to do the mitzvah of eating the lechem haponim. No, the Gemara says that the tznuim, tznei alechesim alikecha, the humble people, they would stand back and they wouldn't go to run to grab a chelik in the lechem haponim, even though it was a mitzvah. You don't make a machlokes. Pashut the dafke ma mitzvah tiskayim al yedei aker. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, this is only true if the bottom line is the mitzvah is going to be fulfilled. So like by the lechem haponim, there's a mitzvah that the lechem haponim has to be eaten. The Kahanim knew the bottom line is that the lechem haponim is going to get eaten. The question is, who's going to get eaten by? So then you don't make a machlokes. Avalim a mitzvah tispata legamri. But if you live in a place and you see that there are mitzvahs that are just not going to be fulfilled, kigoin, hachdasas orchim, or hachzakas talmud Torah. Let's say there's nobody to take in guests. There's nobody to take in somebody who shows up in shul Friday night that needs a meal. Or there's nobody to support the local yeshivas. The yesh b'yadai limchais, and you're a person of consequence in the kehillah, and you have the ability to get up and make a macha and say, listen, Rabbi Isai, we have to shtitz the yeshiva. Listen, Rabbi Isai, we have to see to it that there are houses that take in guests. Bevadai mechuyev limchais, in that case, you have to go make noise. Even though you're going to, so to speak, make machloikis, right? You're going to get up there and you're going to stop being moicha against the tzibbur, and you're going to get up and you're going to say there aren't enough people doing achlas archim, there aren't enough people being machzik Torah. So what? Maybe you should just stand off to the side and be quiet, and you shouldn't make a machloikis even though it's a dvar mitzvah. No, that's only if the dvar mitzvah is going to get fulfilled. Like the lechem upon him, the bottom line is it's all going to get eaten. Somebody is going to daven for the Yomid. Don't worry. You don't have to get up and make a fight that you want to daven for the Yomid. Somebody's going to daven for the Yomid. Let it go, even though it's a mitzvah to daven on a yard site. But if the mitzvah is not going to get done, if people are not going to do achnas orchim, or people aren't going to be machzik lidei loim de Torah, so then you have to make noise. Shaharei midina kaifel an inyanim ke'elu kamavur b'chayshim mishpat b'simen kuf sabach gimel sef aleph ba'agav sef gimel. We see in chayshim mishpat that indeed in a town you could compel people that they have to pay taxes for these things. Ois katan samach vav. The Ramah said that if somebody takes the Amid by force, you don't answer Amen to his brachas. Ein oinen. Samach vav. Ois katan samach vav. She'ein zem varech. Because even though this chazzan might technically be making a bracha, that bracha is not a bracha, ela mina'etz. Rather, it's like he's scorning the Rabbeinu Shalom. Because he went and he took the Amid by force. You're not allowed to do that. You can't take the Amid from the tzibbur by force. It's not yours to take. It has to be al das hakol. You go and you take it by force, that's not a bracha that you say Amen to. You're being machzik lidei over avera. You're being machzik b'machloikis. Shenema b'tzeh berech ni'etz Hashem. Ois sif chav gimel. Peidal and Aleph, second line down in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber. Sar shliach tzibbur. The salary of the shliach tzibbur. Purim mikupas hakol. That money is collected from the community collection box. In other words, from the municipal funds, from the tzibbur funds. That's how you pay the shliach tzibbur. Aval pisha shliach tzibbur moitzi hadal ke'oshir. Even though the bottom line is that the shliach tzibbur, he represents the poor person in the town the same way he represents the wealthy person in town. Still in all, a poor person cannot afford what a rich person could afford. What's the Mechaber saying over here? So the Mechaber started off Simchav Gimel by saying that you pay the chazzan mikupas hakol. You pay him from the community collection box. Now the kupas hakol, where did the money come in from the kupas hakol? This wasn't just a voluntary donation. This isn't the gabbai going around with the pushka and people putting money in the pushka. That's not what the kupas hakol is. The kupas hakol was a collection that the kehillah made. This is an official tax, so to speak, on the members of the kehillah. And everybody is assessed an amount that they have to pay al pi hamamon, according to their material wealth. So the people in charge, the gaboyim, the shiva tuvei ha'ir maybe, they would go through the list of the members of the kehillah, and they would say, okay, Pliny is a wealthy man, he has to pay $5,000 a year. This one has less money, he'll pay $4,000 a year. This one, he's okay, he's well off, but, he's not rich. Every now and then he struggles maybe to pay a big bill, so he'll pay $1,800. Then there are some people that are aniyim. So if somebody's a real ani, you might say, okay, he pays $18. Maybe there'll even be somebody you say he can't pay anything. So the kupas hakol was a collection of money where everybody was assessed an amount that they have to pay based on their financial health and well-being. So the Mechaber says over here in Chav Gimel that the chazzan, the shliach tzibbur, is paid from this kupas hakol, from this collection that's done based on material wealth. Now, says the Mechaber, you might think that it shouldn't be that way. You might think, why should the rich person pay more and the ani pay less? The bottom line is the chazzan is representing, he's the shliach tzibbur for the ani, the same way he's the shliach tzibbur from the ashir. So maybe everybody should pay an equal amount. Why does the ashir pay more? So that's why the Mechaber explains, even though the shliach tzibbur is representing the pauper equal to the way he's representing the Oshir, so you might think that it shouldn't be al pi hamamoin. The tax should not be assessed based on material wealth. It should just be assessed in an equal way. Everybody pays equal amounts. Nevertheless, says the Mechaber, we have to recognize that ein yada ani masegis kashir, that the ani simply can't afford what the usher can. So the usher has to pay more. Haggah, however, the Ramah says, there are those that say, shegoivin chatzi lefi mammon, v'chatzi lefi anafashos, v'cheinu minig hakehilas. The Ramah, we'll see more about this in Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah suggests a very interesting thing. He says we take the salary of the chazzan. Let's say the chazzan gets paid $30,000 a year. We divide it in half, 15,000, 15,000. Now we go ahead and we tax the tzibbur. How do we tax the tzibbur? We make one tax for $15,000 that's based on the material wealth of the people in the kehillah, and the usher is assessed that he has to pay more, and the ani is assessed that he has to pay less. Then for the other 15,000, we divided it up, head by head. Everybody pays an equal amount. We divide 15,000. If the population of the kehillah is 500, we divide 15,000 by 500, and that's what everybody pays. So we divide the paycheck of the chazzan in half, and we do two collections. One half of it is going to be collected based on material wealth. The other half is going to be collected on a one-to-one basis, just based on everybody pays an equal amount. Kind of like Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. You have each state is represented in two different ways. One way they're represented is they're represented by population. A bigger state should have more of a say in the laws of the country. It's more people. On the other hand, they're a state the same way the smaller state or the bigger state is a state. So in the House of Representatives, a bigger state that has a greater population has more representation. But in the Senate, it's 1-for-1, or rather 2-for-1. Every single state is the same. Each state has 2 senators. So the same thing over here. We divide it in half. Half of the chazzan's paycheck we based on material wealth of the tzibbur. The other half we base on just a head count. I think there's a phrase for it. I think it's called a skull tax. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Samazayin, Schar shliach tzibbur, the paycheck of the shliach tzibbur. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we have a steer over here. Over here, the Mechaber says that the pay of the chazan comes from the kupas hakol. And we said that the kupas hakol is a collection that's done al pi mamon. Everybody is assessed how much to pay based on what he could afford. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Siman nun heisef chaf aleph, and Siman nun heisef chaf aleph, shepoisek with the Mechaber paskins, the chetzyoy lefi mamon v'chetzyoy lefi nefesh. He paskins like what the Ramah says here, that we divide it in half, and half is done based on material wealth, and the other half is done just on a head tax. Ayin b'sefer El Yerabah shebechalik the bechazin shani. The El Yerabah says that no, over here the Mechaber is addressing specifically a chazan. In Nun Hey, he's not just addressing the din of a chazan. Over there he's addressing also townspeople that want to go away for Yom Tov, if they have an obligation to supply somebody to stand in their stead to make a minyan. So says the El Yerabah, over here the Mechaber is specifically addressing a shliach tzibbur. Over there he's talking about other cases. But from the Gra it's mashma that the Mechaber actually changed his mind, and over there in Siman Nun Hey, he taka paskins like the Ramah over here. The Kupas HaKol was a collection that was done where everybody was assessed based on their material wealth, not on just a head count. The Ramah said, we split it in half. Why? Because on the one hand, it is true that the shliach tzibbur represents each person equally. So then the ani should have to pay the same amount as the usher, and the usher should be able to pay just as little as the ani. We're equal as far as paying for the shliach tzibbur. He's my shliach the same way as your shliach the same way as my shliach. So that's the svara why we should go lefi amamoin. But v'yesh lepamim sha'ashirim noistim yoser mama la'chazan shekoli ariv yoser. But on the other hand, there is a reason to say why you should go based on material wealth. Because a wealthier person might be willing to pay more money for a chazan with a nicer voice. Now the ani could always say, you know what, I'll pick myself up, I'll leave. I'm not interested in paying so much money. Very nice, you want to pay extra money because the chazan has a nice voice. I'd rather get the cheaper chazan who doesn't have such a nice voice. So how do you create kriach out of this mess? Therefore we make this pshara, we make this accommodation that we divide the chazan's paycheck in half, and half we do al pi ha'mammon, and half we do al pi ha'nefesh. The Ramah said that is indeed the minig. V'cheinu minig hakehilos. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut nine hakehilos, but Moshe Kasav. The Ramah writes on the Torah, the minig medina isenu dal v'asher noistin b'shaveh. The Ramah on the Torah, the Moshe, says that the minig in our medinos is that you go legabe hanefesh. You do a skull tax. Everybody pays the exact same amount, the poor person and the rich person. So that's done according to a head count. The chazzan, the Darkei Moshe says, we pay lefi nefashos. Each person pays the same amount. And that's what it means, says the Darkei Moshe, when we say chetziyoi lefi nefashos. Half we do according to nefashos. The gam mikol nisuin magia loy kefi nidon v'hu chetziyoi shelefi mamon. So in other words, what the Darkei Moshe is saying is like this. The Ramah here in the Shulchan Aruch says that v'chein hu minig hakehilos. The minig of the kehillah is to do chatzi lefi mamain, the chatzi lefi hanafashos. And the way we explain that in the context of Siman Nun Gimel Sif Chav Gimel is that we take the paycheck of the chazan and we divide it in half. If he gets $13,000, we divide it 15,000. We raise 15,000 of his paycheck, where we go out to the kehillah and we assess a wealthier person to pay more towards that 15,000 and a poorer person to pay less towards that 15,000. Then we go out to collect the other 15,000. That we do lefi hanefesh. What does that mean? We count how many people there are, and we divide it by that number, and everybody pays the same amount. The Mishnah Berurah is bringing down from the Darkei Moshe on the Torah, on the Torah, a different way of understanding what it means that the minig is we do chatzi lefi ha'mammon, chatzi lefi hanefesh. He says the other way to understand the minig is that when it comes to a chazzan we do lefi hanefesh. A chazzan we do, everybody pays, we divide the chazzan's paycheck and by the amount of people in the town, and everybody pays the same amount. What would the logic for that be? Because the shliach tzibbur represents everybody equally. And that's what it means, chatzi lefi hanefesh. Chatzi lefi hanefesh means the paycheck of the chazan is paid according to a census of the population. What does it mean, chatzi lefi ha'mammon? That there's another chatzi, there's another epis tax, where we assess people based on the material wealth? That's talking about chasanas. By chasana, you need the chazan. The chazan has to come, Baruch haba. So we need the chazan. How do we pay the chazan by each wedding? That we do lefi nidon. What does lefi nidon mean? Nidon comes from the word nidunya. We look at the chasana and we say, what's the dowry over here? How much is the Kala's parents? How much are they kicking in? Are they supporting, $2,500 a month? What are they giving? So it's a wealthy chasana. It's a wealthy chasana. You got to pay the chazan more. And that's what it means that there's a chatzi where there's a tax that's assessed based on material wealth. The chazan makes some of his money. That's the money he gets paid for davening for the Amud. That he gets kefi hanefesh, a skull tax. Then there's the money that the chazan makes from doing chasanas. That money he gets paid kefi nidon. That's lefi ha'mammon. That's according to the material wealth. Continues the Mishnah Berurah is cut nine. V'hu achatzir shalafi mammon. Levush kasav, the Levush writes, the b'makom she'ein minig, in a place where there is no set minig, yigbul lefi mammon, we should assess based on wealth. Ayin b'choshebish b'sibikos abel gimel siv gimel b'haga, v'ayin b'darkei Moshe demash b'minei, ta'afilu das ha-paiskim the paiskim lefi ha-mammon, even according to those paiskim that say that the assessment should be done, each individual according to his financial well-being, and neinu rak b'skiras ha-shliach tzibbur she'sarkor ha'isar liyamim ne'roim. That's only talking about a chazzan that you're hiring for Shoshana Yom Kippur. The bazes v'irulu lefi mammon, over there we assess each person according to his material wealth, according to his resources. Ki ha'ashirim machmas ashram lo yuklo lotzeis mibateihem ulanicham reikam. Because over here we have an interesting problem. The rich people, they're stuck in town. They can't leave because they can't leave town for Yom Naraim and leave their houses full of valuable possessions unguarded. But the aniyim, if we're going to charge the aniyim the same money as the ashirim, you know what the aniyim are going to do? The aniyim are going to say, sayonara, I'm not going to daven in this shul. I'm going somewhere else where they don't charge me. So the ashirim need the aniyim to stay to make sure that there's a minyan. So therefore, the ashirim have to pick up a greater piece of the tab. But the shliach tzibur davens for the Amud all year round. Ein mechashred lefi mammon levad. Over there, we don't only go by material resources. Okay. Now we go to Sif Chav Daled. Very interesting Sif. Says the Mechaber. Tzibbur shetzrichin liskar rav u'shliach tzibbur. You have a shul, they have to hire a chazzan, but they also need a rav. Ve'ein b'yodem k'deis chashdeim, and they don't have enough money to pay a chazzan and a rav. Says the Mechaber, what do? Im hu rav muvik v'gadol b'toiro baki b'hira. If he's a real solid rav, he's a Talmid Chacham, a gadol b'Torah, and he's a Meir Tzedek, he's a Poisik, he could paskin shailas. Who kaidim? Then you pay the Rav first, and you don't get a shliach tzibur. And we're going to see this means even back in the day when you needed the shliach tzibur to be moitzi people in their davening. You had Amaratzim who didn't know how to daven for themselves, so you needed a shliach tzibur to be moitzi them. You could only pay a Rav or a shliach tzibur if it's a Rav who's a Poisik and a Talmid Chacham. You hire a Rav and you don't hire a Chazan. You have people who aren't going to be Yotze davening. There's nobody to moitzi them. Doesn't matter. Rav comes first. So tzibur shetzrich liska Rav shliach tzibur ve'ein miyad b'deis chashdeim and when Rav muvik v'gadol b'Torah baki b'hira who kaidem. V'im lav, but if the Rav isn't the Poisik anyway, he says a nice drasha, but he's not a Poisik. V'im lav shliach tzibur kaidem. Then you hire shliach tzibur first, because at least everybody will be Yotze davening. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Kat Ayin Aleph. If the Rav is a Talmid Chacham and a Poisik, who kaidem? He comes first. Even though back in the day that means there are some people in the Kehillah who won't be Yotze davening. They have nobody to be moitzi them. This Rav that you're going to hire, who's a Rav and a Poisik, and he's going to teach the Kehillah Torah and Dinei Torah, Adif min atfilah. That's more important than davening. Brings us down from the Chuvas Arash. V'ayin b'bi'er halacha, and take a look at the bi'er halacha. The Chavetz Chaim says, Shekasavnu, where I write, Goydol hachiv b'chol ir lazeh, the great obligation in every city to hire a Rav who's a Meir Tzedek. The Kasa b'Chuvas Chasam Sefer Chelik Arachaim Siman Reish Vav, the Chol Anshi Ir Mechuyavim Litein Lazeh. Every person in the city has to give money towards the hiring of a true Rav who's a Poisik. Ve'ein echad yachal loymar ein ani tzarech l'Rav u'Meir Tzedek. Nobody has the right to say, I don't need a Rav. I'm fine without a Rav. Because even if he's Taket Talmid Chacham and he never has any shilas and he doesn't need a Rav, doesn't matter. He has to be noisa ba'oil. He has to help carry the burden of the whole tzibur. The same way every member of the city has to pay towards a mikveh. Ayin sham. Oifkan ayin beis. V'em lav. But if the candidate for the Rabbanus is not a paisik, then you hire the chazzan first. V'em lav. What the Mechaber wants to say is, since this Rav is a shvacha Rav, he's not going to be able to pass Shilas, he's not going to be able to tell the tzibbur what to do, then shliach tzibbur kaidim. Then a chazan comes first. So that at least he'll be able to be mitzi the rabbim in their chiyuv of tefillah. Okay, let's take a look at this beautiful bir halacha. Bir halacha dibur hamaschil shliach tzibbur, on the importance of a rav. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Ayin me Mishnah Berurah Sifkat Nayin Aleph. Take a look at what I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah Sifkat Nayin Aleph on the importance of hiring a rav who's a paisik. V'hu noivei amitzuvas harash, and these that I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah flows out of the words of the Tshuvas Harash, a rishon. Umizeh yira ha'adam goydel hachiv, and from there everybody could see the great obligation al kol ir, on every city, liskar lehem rav sheyoyer lehem b'mitzvahs HaTorah u'mishpateh eich lehisnaig, who will teach them and paskin for them in the mitzvahs of the Torah and in the dinei Torah how to be noyig, pashut, what to do. V'lo ki ivrim hamegashishim ba'afela, so that they should not be like blind people stumbling around in the dark. You see that even if people in the town are not going to be yotzet tefillah, because they're einam bekim, they're amaratzim who don't know how to daven on their own, and they're not going to have a shliach tzibbur to be mitzi them because you used up the budget to hire a rav, it doesn't matter. Gam kein achiyav azehu kaidem. The chiyuv of hiring a rav who's a Meir Tzedek comes first. Ubefrat the manchi ir yichalim gam kein lehispala la'atzman. Certainly, if the bnei ir know how to daven by themselves, like we do, and we don't need a chazzan to be mitzi us in the tefillah, then certainly the obligation to hire a professional rav, a paisik, comes first. Bevadai zeh kaidem. Umizeh yimlu reses v'fachad. And from this, you should be filled up with trembling and with dread. Ezemei ha'aryaros, those cities, hanimtzam michutz lamadina, who are found out on the countryside, out of the city, she'ein lehem rav u'meir tzedek be'iram, where they don't have a rav and a paisik in their city. Va'avain godelhu k'may she'be'arnu, and the Chavetz Chaim says this is a great avera not to have a rav. Hagam sheloichim lehem sheichet u'baydek, even if they do hire somebody who's a sheichet, who can at least slaughter animals so they have meat and chicken to eat, u'baydek, and he knows how to check them for treifais. Im kol zeh, but besides that, haloi tzrichim leish meir tzedek, they still need a rav, a paisik, sheyoyer lehem dinei Shabbos, v'yom tov, somebody to teach them hilchas Shabbos, hilchas yom tov, hilchas Pesach hachamura, the halachos of Pesach, matzah, chometz, v'dinei tfilas mikvah, hilchas nida, v'chol prate hilchas nida, u'shar dinei tereseinu akdosha, asher yasar yisam ha'adam v'chai bahem. It's very nice you have a sheikh and a baidik who can tell you that the chicken is kosher and that the meat is kosher. But how about hilchas Shabbos, hilchas Pesach, hilchas Yom Tov, hilchas Nida? V'chol shkein sheyesh seichmin lehem shliach tzibur meforsim lemenagin godel. There are towns where they hire choshev a chazzan who's a great menagain, and they spend kama meos ruble, hundreds of rubles, kesef, lashana, hundreds of silver rubles a year, she'inagin lehem b'koil noim, so that he could sing for them in a beautiful voice. Ubeshir kazeha yuchel likach lam rav meir tzedek. For that money, they could have hired a rav who's a paisik, v'gam shliach tzibur, the chazzan too. She yachal laver of that teva about tefillah gedaven for the yamid b'Shabbos v'yom tov v'rishana v'yom kippur kish kasher b'bedina isenu, and he won't be a ulala chazzan. But so what? You'll have a shliach tzibur and you'll have a rav. Ubevadei hayim iskabel of ruzet tfilasim lamarim, and if they would do that, their tefillas would be mekubal and shemayim. Masha ain't kain ata, but now Shehismanus HaShliach tzibbur hu shaloi l'shem shamayim, where they went ahead and they hired a shliach tzibbur with a beautiful voice before using the money to hire a rav as a paisik. So it's not l'shem shamayim. Al zeh nemar nosna alai b'koil al kein snei siyah. That's that pasuk in Yirmiyah that we mentioned already before, where the Rebbeinu Shalom says, you want to know why I'm angry at Klal Yisrael? Because they raised their voice against me, and that's why I hate them. And such a city will go from calamity to calamity. Because they don't have a paisik to instruct them in Darchei Hashem. And because of that, they come to Chilul Shabbos and Chilul Yom Tov, v'achilas chash chametz chas v'shalom. Umi yoidea oid kama isurim echayav krisus chas v'shalom Hashem yishmar me'anoshim ka'elu. Beautiful bir halacha. It shows you the importance of having a rav. You have shuls nowadays that you go into, they don't have a rav. They don't have a rav. How do you not have a rav? We don't need a rav. Why do we need a rav? We need a rav? What? To speak before Musaf, so that we get home late? We need a rav? What do we need a rav for? Who do you ask your shilas to? I go to so-and-so. Yeah, what happens when on Shabbos you have a shilah what to do with the cholent, and now you don't know what to do, and you don't have a rav in shul, so you don't have anybody to ask, so now you just do whatever you thought up, and will you machal Shabbos or not? A shul has to have a rav. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. It's because of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu should say Yeshua's for us parnasa shaduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the biyaskal tzedek. And the hair of Yameinu Amen. Be well.